Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Yissilmissil Productions channel. My name is Steven Yissel, and today we are continuing our deep dive series into the Bermuda Triangle. We're on part 33 today, and we'll be reading one chapter, again from the Bermuda Triangle II book by author Gian J. Quasar. So today's chapter is number 5. It is a triangle of today. So I hope you all had a good week. I hope I gave you a lot to think about. So we have different images from the book today that I photographed, and we're going to be looking at it here on this side of the screen. When the time comes, we will display it up there. So just make sure, if you're catching this after the fact or if you're on Rumble, we are streaming both to YouTube and Rumble. If you can, leave the like, share this around to like-minded people. That's all I ask. The path is narrow here. Alright, so we're just gonna jump right into this, and as I said, when we get to the photos in the book, they'll be displayed up here. But in the meantime, here's the slideshow of the Illuminati. But let's get started. Chapter 5. A Triangle of Today. Disappearances within the Bermuda Triangle in the last decade have basically been concentrated in the same sections of it as those over the century before. That is, in the southwest corner off Miami, amidst the Florida Keys, and within the Bahamas. Except for an emphasis on boats rather than aircraft, the same general circumstances have prevailed. None transmitted any clear maydays, nor, except in one possible incident, was an EPIRB signal picked up by any base station. While piracy can explain the incidents, both in terms of location and the utter silence of the victims, it should be noted that few of the missing boats were valuable to piracy. Pirates hijack large, fast cruisers, which are the only models that make drug running viable. Sailboats, small day cruisers, and sport craft do not, and yet these are precisely the kinds that have vanished most quantitatively over the last decade. And again, this book is from 2017, so they're talking pretty much about the 2010s. Unexplained disappearances near shore in the past have been very limited. The disappearance within a span of only 19 minutes of the cabin cruiser Witchcraft, that's the name of the cruiser, in 1967 was the most sensational, whereas for aircraft, the two disappearances while coming in from for a landing at St. Thomas are the most inexplicable. Until recent years, The Witchcraft's loss was the closest to land, much less to a harbor, that any boat has vanished in the triangle. One of four principal elements that make it the most sensational nautical disappearance. The other contributing elements are the short time span, the fact that something was below the boat that either Barak hit or it hit Barak, and the fact that the cabin cruiser had built-in flotation. To underscore the inherent mystery in the case of the Witchcraft, especially in an unsinkable boat, it would be wise to contrast this case with a more recent and tragic loss at sea. This is the disappearance, initially, of the 25-foot What's Left, that's the name of the boat, near the Bay of Florida on October 17, 2002, and its reappearance 2 weeks later, on November 3rd, capsized and beached at Cape Canaveral, an estimated distance of 400 miles. Presumably, it had drifted the entire time without being noticed by a massive Coast Guard search. Inside the cabin was the body of Gary Lisk, the owner. That's spelled L-I-S-K. He seems to have been caught off guard in a lightning-like moment, with one shoe on and the other off, an indication that whatever happened caught him between dressing or undressing. The whereabouts of the other two aboard, Neil Edelman and his son, Neil Jr., remain unknown. Given the circumstances, it seems Lisk was preparing to come topside, perhaps even called by Edelman, when the boat was capsized or something else happened that took the Edelmans off the boat. The Coast Guard speculated that the boat had drifted, capsized. The reason why it had not been visually sighted was its aqua-painted bottom, although the boat may have capsized in the surf as it came into shore with the breakers. Yet by contrast, the Witchcraft at harbor's mouth totally vanished, and did so in a brief interim between the call for assistance at 9:03 p.m. and the arrival of the cutter at 9:21 p.m. If one does not accept the extraordinary, then the only other possibility is criminal, intentional disappearance, an unlikely fit for the successful Dan Barak and his friend, Father Horgan. Standing on its own, considerable mystery surrounds the What's Left. The trio's destination was the wreck of the California, about 65 miles southwest of Marco Island, but still within the Gulf. So the California is the ship they were going to locate. This location cannot explain how it drifted into the swift Gulf Stream current in order for it to drift around Florida into the Atlantic. Nor can the speed of the drift be understood. It drifted 400 miles in only 2 weeks, a speed hard to imagine if it was capsized the entire time. One clue suggests the boat was trying to escape something. The throttles were found fully engaged. Why then was the skipper, Lisk, inside the cabin and not manning the helm? No water was in his lungs. so he was dead before the boat capsized. Yet his spine had been transected, which could not have happened from capsizing. An alternate explanation is that the Edelmans were no longer aboard and Lisk below was hiding, unconscious or dead, as the Hydrosport sped on until it reached the Gulf Stream on its own. Such a scenario will repeat itself with derelict boats, though it doesn't explain, in this case, why Lisk would remain ensconced in the cabin below, or how he got a broken back. Similarly, on August 17th, 2009, a 22-foot fishing boat was found hard aground on a sandbar near the northern tip of Anclote Key, and that's spelled Anclote. Its throttles engaged and engine still running. The owner, Mark Portus, spelled Portus, had gone fishing near the key early in the morning, some 12 hours before it was found at 7:30 p.m. During the last decade, a number of abandoned boats turned up in unusual circumstances along the same track line between the keys and along the Gulf Coast, with a disturbing concentration around Anclote Key. A month later, on September 20th, 2009, the 16-foot sport craft of Paula Migliorini, and that's spelled Migliorini, was found drifting deserted about 3 miles north of Anclote Key. Her pet dog was still aboard, so were the keys and her towel. Although her body was later found off Hudson Beach, there is an element of mystery here because this was one of several other incidents in the same area where boats were being found deserted and the bodies later found near Hudson Beach. Proof they had fallen or been pulled over. Only the week before, on September 13th, 2009, a boat grounded near Boca Chica, Florida. The Coast Guard discovered it belonged to David Schermerhorn, and that last name is spelled Schermerhorn, and that he had been diving near Middle Sambo, a reef 5 miles south of Key West. During the Coast Guard search, the remains of a body were found, with legs gone. But it was not clearly identifiable if the remains were Schermerhorn's. The condition of the boat indicated Schermerhorn was about to dive when something came along and ripped it free, presumably throwing him into the water. The dive flag was up and 100 feet of anchor line was extended, though the end was frayed and the anchor no longer attached. His clothes, cell phone, and wallet were aboard. Some clues do not add up. Chris Macquarie left Siesta Key on July 12, 2010 to go snorkeling, a shallow water sport, and he was due back by 8:30 p.m. that night. Yet on July 16th, his boat was found deserted 38 miles west of Sanibel Island in deep water, This makes for quite a drift from the area of Sarasota, Florida, about 60 miles away. The only conclusion was that the boat drifted there and was not seen by anyone, including the Coast Guard, until then. In almost the precise location where what's left was found, about 30 miles north of Key West, at 4:13 a.m., an EPIRB briefly sounded on May 14, 2013, indicating trouble. It was registered to J. Rydberg, his name is spelled Rydberg, for his 3/4 time. That's the name of the boat. Hey Gian J, good to see you here. So it was registered to J. Rydberg for his 3/4 time, a 39-foot trimaran. He had left Fort Myers the day before for a leisurely cruise to Key West. Before Coast Guard units could overfly the area, the signal was quickly extinguished. The boat was soon declared missing. Strangely, however, at the end of the month, the trimaran was found beached in Cuba. Attached to it at the end of a line was Rydberg, dead apparently from drowning. Although it is common for a single-handed sailor to attach a lifeline to himself while sailing alone, there is no explanation for how the EPIRB had been triggered and why. On the face of it, Rydberg had fallen over, jumped, been knocked over, or had been pulled over. And this is a continuing theme here. On May 4th, 2014, Robert Garcia departed Key West, Florida for a day fishing in his 28-foot Miss Juliet, a white hull with a distinctive yellow stripe along the side. The weather was perfect. The trip should have been uneventful. No trace was found, even by fast response cutters like the Margaret Norvell. Unlike with the previous decades, closer to shore disappearance of vessels and, far more intriguing, closer to shore disappearances of crews from sound boats almost had become the norm in the 21st century. So I have the first image here. So we'll be looking at these images in the book, photographed and brought up here. Perfect. Hey Andreas, good to see you here. So this is on the page I'm reading right now. Among these cases is the disappearance of the Dominic Porcaro on December 20th, 2013 from his 26-foot Cuddy cabin cruiser Happy Day Tree. That's the name of it. He had taken it for a cruise in Jupiter Inlet, north of West Palm Beach. The vessel was later found ship-shape, but grounded near Juno Beach in the Atlantic. An extensive Coast Guard search at sea, which included helicopters and fixed-wing aircraft, failed to find any trace of his body. The case was mysterious enough that organized crime was ephemerally blamed. Dominic's brother John had been accused of having been part of the Gambino crime family and was even indicted in 2003 on charges of a telemarketing scandal. However, by this time, John had long vanished. In 1998, he had left his wife, Philomena, a note reading, quote, "Phil went fishing, got call, swordfish are biting. Love, J. I'll call you later." End quote. Rather, he disappeared and his car, cell phone, and keys were found at the Fort Lauderdale airport. The simplest theory, however, seems preferable. Since Porcaro had been arrested the day before for DUI, one theory offered that he had gone to sea without having fully recovered and simply fell overboard. In response to this, Maureen Porcaro, Dominic's younger brother's wife, declared that Dominic was an avid boater. Quote, "He's had many boats and has never had any problems." End quote. When accident seems improbable, intentional disappearance always seems a safe theory to fall back on, despite the fact that there is no evidence for it as well. Disappearances of this character not only happen frequently, they happen in circumstances that would seem to preclude any intentionality. For instance, off West Palm Beach on June 18, 2003, Frank and Romina Leone had vanished after leaving in their 16-foot boat from Lantana Boat Ramp for day sailing. A search as large as the state of Georgia failed to uncover a trace. This author here is continually listing all these different disappearances, so we're jumping from one to another here. On December 20th, this time in 2009, it was announced that another boat had vanished, a 17-foot Key Largo with two Miami men aboard en route to Bimini from Haulover Inlet, Miami. Richard Alicia and Edwin Pritchard had been missing a week since December 13th, by the time the announcement had been made. A 6-day search turned up no sign of them. A controversial disappearance is that of James Trinidad, spelled Trindade, on January 13th, 2006. He left Memory Rock, Bahamas in his tri-engine Donzi, in company of two other boats, a 35-foot and a 22-foot vessel. All three headed southwest across the Gulf Stream to Boynton Beach, Florida, and home. According to the other boaters, Trinidad, with his powerful Donzi, was ahead of them when their 35-foot boat began to experience trouble. Both vessels attempted to reach Trinidad by VHF radio. Although he was in sight ahead, he did not answer. Until they lost sight of him, they continued to try to alert Trinidad that they were intentionally falling behind. The two vessels diverted to the Boca Yacht Club in Palm Beach, Florida. Arriving hours later, they were surprised to hear Trinidad had never arrived at Boynton Beach. A search quickly ensued. A Falcon jet found Trinidad's Donzi aimlessly speeding in circles about 38 miles off Port St. Lucie, having drifted considerably north in the fast Gulf Stream current. A Dolphin helicopter lured a swimmer at 3:20 a.m. No one was aboard. Everything was ship-shape. As Zenray says, similar to missing 411 material. I mean, this is essentially what this is in a way. I see the similarities. Sailor John Batchelor apparently met his fate near Memory Rock as well. Popular and well-known amidst the sailing circuit, he was at 72, described as similar looking to Ernest Hemingway. Friends also knew he had an unpublished manuscript aboard. Quote, entitled The Drunken Monkey. End quote. He was considered, quote, a crusty old curmudgeon, end quote, and purely a man of the sea. He had been born in England, lived in Nigeria, and then Australia, where he had left his wife. He didn't own a house, but preferred to live on his boat, Joy B. Always aboard with him on his sailboat was his pet dog, Dingo. When sighted deserted on January 19th, 2012, off Memory Rock, the Joy B was riding at anchor. Rescuers boarded and found Dingo alone and nearly starved to death. Rotten oranges hung in their mesh bag from the pilot house ceiling. The dinghy was still on its davits. The side door was open, the swim ladder down. Had Batchelor gone over the side for a routine reason and simply drowned? Dingo, however, had a deep gash on his hind leg, but somehow had survived for about 3 weeks alone, an estimation based on Batchelor's last routine entry in his log. Salvage specialist Gary Simmons came to the Joy B the day after discovery in order to tow the boat back. He found a Kevlar rope hanging from the boat when he arrived. According to the Globe and Mail, and here's an excerpt from that, divers set them up to anchor to the seabed, but they float freely when not in use. Friends believe Batchelor ran over the rope, which slowed his progress significantly. They speculate he anchored and dove into the water. Then he cut the rope, tossed it on the boat, but couldn't, for whatever reason, get back on board. The current was strong, and the area is also known for sharks. And that's the end of the excerpt there. An interesting theory, but for one factor. It does not explain the wound on Dingo. Like Rydberg, he also would have attached a lifeline to himself, and this should have been found trailing over the side. So we do have another photo here, or an etching. This is of Memory Rock. Moreover, why throw a cut line back on board when it is easier to get back on board and pull it up? Some of those who had known Batchelor for years were suspicious of the circumstances, especially those in the Ontario, Canada, sailing community from which he had come. According to Robin Moorish, quote, "He was healthy, he was alert, he was competent, and, most of all, John Batchelor was not a wuss. If somebody came aboard, he would have tried to take them on himself, which makes me quite nervous." End quote. Robin Moorish's wife echoed the opinion that there was foul play. Quote, "Mr. Batchelor had been living on his boat for decades, and it was his 18th sailing trip south, so it is unlikely he made a mistake and fell." End quote. Another friend, Ruth Allen, knew he wouldn't go swimming in that water. Quote, "The whole thing is just wrong." End quote. More than any of them, Mrs. Moorish captured the spirit of the vast ocean and that unforgiving horizon, expressing a sentiment that can apply not just to John Batchelor's case, but to all those who have vanished. Quote, "A man disappeared in the middle of the ocean. Nobody's ever going to know. This is what happens when you cruise. It happens in international waters, out of sight of land, and there's nobody to rescue you." End quote. On May 26, 2008, the Coast Guard finally suspended the long search for Pierre Steenberg. That's spelled Steenberg, who was sailing in the 36-foot sailboat Hollow Kiki. That's 3 words. HOLOKIKI. The vessel was first sighted abandoned by another boat drifting lifeless 20 miles north of West End, Grand Bahama, near Memory Rock. The vessel could not have been abandoned very long, as Steenberg had recently left nearby Fort Lauderdale to take the Hollow Kiki to Holland. Multifactorial causes no doubt apply to the wide array of vessels found derelict. However, the most interesting remain those that indicate they were abandoned in fair weather before foul weather damaged them, or those with indications they hit something below. Deserted boats of this nature happen even far from land, and potential pirates, and yet, curiously, the derelicts show signs they were ripped from their anchorage with cut or frayed lines, or they had just hit something. We're going to start another story here. Just give me a moment. On January 15th, 2014, veteran Dutch sailor Sietse Hagen had left Tenerife for Barbados in the West Indies in his sailboat Poker Face. Months later, on April 8th, a freighter en route from Savannah, Georgia to Agadir and Morocco sighted Poker Face drifting aimlessly in the Sargasso Sea. No sign of Hagen was found aboard the vessel. However, when the rescue crew boarded the sailboat, a 27-foot Gib, it was heavily damaged. The captain could only liken it to the boat having been beached, though this was naturally impossible in mid-Atlantic. The weather had also been good, so that the damage was not caused by the storm. The paperwork was taken and the sailboat was sunk as a hazard to navigation. In March 2001, a large sailboat was sighted 300 miles south of Bermuda by the crew of the yacht Tintinara. The boat was a wreck, dismasted, the sails tattered and hanging over the side. Carolyn Grant, who was one of those aboard the Tintinara, describes it. So here's a description of the name on the transom was Sophia, and the hailing port Nantes, France. It appeared to be about 45 feet with a center cockpit and an aft cabin. I'm not sure what make it was, but since the hailing port was French, I figured the boat was one of those weird-looking French designs. Regardless, the mast was completely gone. The only thing at the mast step was mangled stainless, which I assumed was a mast pulpit. The starboard lifelines were gone, which gave evidence that it lost the rig to starboard, and the scratches on the starboard freeboard added to the theory that it rolled or the rig went down on the starboard side. Shredded sails were dangling in the water from the broken forestay on the bow, and half the boom was hanging off the stern. The waterline had brown stains on it. At the time, we thought they were diesel or oil stains from a possible leak or malfunction. There was no sign of life aboard from what we could see. We circled a number of times, blasting the air horn and hailing for anyone on board. And that's the end of the excerpt there. Despite not knowing the cause of what befell Sophia, Grant still expressed the anxiety that comes with finding a derelict. Quote, Pat and I looked at each other disconcertingly. Subquote, I don't like this. And subquote, I said quietly. Subquote, neither do I. End subquote, he replied. End quote. Tintinara was 550 miles north of Antigua, literally in the middle of the triangle, and equally far from any help for themselves if something should now happen. However, due to the calm weather, Tintinara's captain, Pat, was able to board the vessel. He was an experienced captain, and his eyes noticed much. The cabin was a shambles, but the boat was dry. There was water in the bilge, but not up to the floor. The boat had clearly rolled around. Everything was strewn on the floor. The vessel must have been derelict a long time. The paper products had all disintegrated, and he could find no logbook. He decided to scuttle the Sophia as a navigational hazard. Pat Grant had been right. The Sophia had been derelict a long time. A check with the Coast Guard confirmed that the vessel was reported missing a year before. They were thanked, Grant recalls, for scuttling the hazard. Pondering the mystery, Grant recalled that they continued to wonder what had happened to Sophia's crew. She had noted that the, quote, primary winch still had 3 wraps from the jib sheet, and the handle was still in the winch. Whoever was on board had been sailing her to the end, and most likely in good weather, because both companionway hatches were open. The deflated dinghy was lashed to the stern. The dinghy outboard was still mounted to the transom. End quote. Grant admitted that the crew considered many scenarios as to what might have happened. Anxious to know if the people aboard had been rescued, the Grants asked, but the Coast Guard never replied. However, Pat had remembered that alerts had been set up the year before for Sophia and St. Lucia. This appeared to be the same boat. She had departed France for the West Indies and vanished. The crew of the Tintinara had finally discovered her fate. Like so many other vessels, Sophia must have been near the triangle when whatever happened. Like so many others, the sailboat probably had drifted around the entire Sargasso Sea and came back yet again to reside in the heart of the triangle. On July 14th, 1997, another yacht had drifted in from the currents north of the Sargasso Sea to the Azores and was found abandoned. The Atlantic Runner, a 25-foot sailboat, had a broken mainmast but was otherwise ship-shape. No evidence was found aboard to indicate what happened to its skipper, John McMurray, who had been sailing from Massachusetts. Heart attacks and strokes can overtake the single-handed sailor. In the case of the Marigold, a Tiana 37, the vessel grounded on February 6, 2009 on Trinidad, far off course from Barbados, where Terry Green, the skipper, had been headed from the Canaries. His body was found aboard. He had last been in touch with the weatherman a month before, January 15th, complaining of what he thought was a mild heart attack. His boat was then seen drifting off the Blanchisseuse coast. So this word is spelled Blanchissuse. Unlike with Hagen and Green, it is more common that derelicts are found with no evidence aboard to suggest what happened to their occupants. The disappearance of 69-year-old Ulysses Didier is the exception. His 37-foot Tranquility was found drifting 65 miles off St. John's Pass, Florida, October 2007. The first inkling of danger came at 3:15 p.m. when a sundancer circled the vessel and noticed it had a broken railing. Upon boarding, the log was consulted and it revealed the vessel had not been abandoned long. The last entry on October 15th indicated that Didier was going to anchor for the day, but apparently upon going topside, he fell or was pulled over. Age is a factor quickly raised in any discussion of the large number of 60-plus-year-old boaters who have disappeared from their vessels, often valuable ones deservedly earned by retirement that no one would willfully abandon. These lost boaters grew up in the 1960s when to be the adventurous sea navigator and surfer was popular sport for the young. Now aging and stubborn, they continue to sail the seas alone, either sure of their skill and health or indifferent to the consequences of death at sea. For some, indeed, this is preferable to the prospects of a slow death in assisted living. On February 6, 2009, the 24-foot sailboat Blue Star had drifted into the inlet at St. Augustine. The skipper, John Franklin, was 69 years old. The last time he was seen was at 9 a.m. the morning before, when he left Volano Beach near the Comanche Cove Marina. Blue Star must not have been abandoned that long, for the motor was still running when it was found. Still, no trace of the body was found, though this was close to shore. Age may also be a factor in the disappearance of Marcos Arguelles from his boat. He was 67 years old and went on a fishing jaunt off the coast of Florida on June 18, 2008. A search found nothing, but did locate his empty 22-foot pleasure craft near Soldier Key. And this listing just keeps going. Quasar, here in this chapter, he's painting a picture here. He's seeing patterns and he's presenting it to us. Among the examples of elderly sailors vanishing from their sailboats is the case of Mark Meyer, spelled M-Y-H-R-E, of 62 years old. Outside Miami Harbor on the ocean side of Elliott Key, his sailboat, the Galilean, was found beached on January 2nd, 2013. Meyer had last been heard from on Christmas Day by family members. It was simply assumed that Arend van der Hoven fell off his 23-foot boat on July 8, 2012. He had left the marina at 8 a.m., but did not return as scheduled by 2 p.m. A huge search finally found his boat drifting aimlessly south of Marathon in the Florida Keys. Regardless of the age of the individual missing, derelicts have long continued to turn up in similar locations. Decades ago, the missing occupants were often much younger than today's victims, since age is becoming an obvious factor today. One has to dutifully note that older sailors are far more common now than younger ones. The sport is not as popular with the young, and those still in business cannot afford the time. The so-called straw man arguments are asserted in an attempt to minimize the phenomenon of derelict vessels. These include falling over, the most common, from a variety of causes: heart attacks, strokes, going over the side for a reason such as to unfoul a line or inspect the hull, and curiously, even from panic. Some of these causes can explain derelicts in the triangle, but taken as a whole, the triangle's drifters are not so easily explained. Proponents who believe that the disappearances can only be the result of intelligence note that although it may be true that only individuals had been aboard most of these derelicts, it is nevertheless true that in no other section of the world's oceans do individuals fall over so frequently and vanish, despite the fact that the Mediterranean and parts of the oceans off Australia are heavily trafficked. It is interesting to note that in the case of derelicts where the sole operator was older, none of them except Green, the skipper of the Marigold, if they did suffer a stroke or heart attack, did so in a position where they might simply die aboard the vessel. In each case, it must have been where they would then fall over. A general pattern also seems apparent in the Bermuda Triangle disappearances. Once a close-to-shore disappearance was rare, and now it is largely the rule. Proponents of the theory that crews are being intentionally removed note that deep water sailing is not so common anymore and hasn't been since Florida's economic decline for the last 15 years, precisely the time in which disappearances have come closer to shore, as if whatever had been causing the disappearances no longer had the ample opportunities far out at sea and had, as a necessity, to move in closer to shore. Just think about that. So this phenomenon isn't just happening in a single location. It's like seeking out these other boats because they're not going far enough into where the triangle's at. Noting that a natural phenomenon cannot follow such a pattern, proponents of the, quote, abduction theory, end quote, propose that the only alternative is an intelligent, directed purpose. Believers in UFO abductions will raise a number of points, as we shall see, to not only assert a motive, but also the ability for how UFOs could do this. Another age-old pattern that plays out into these theories is, however, an established fact. Pets, whether dogs, cats, birds, or even monkeys, never go missing. They remain aboard the ship. On the other hand, talking parrots are either found dead or missing with their owners. Ivan Sanderson and Charles Berlitz made a case for this phenomenon, suggesting UFO abduction, noting that speech indicated intelligent life to, quote, aliens, end quote, and therefore the parrot was also seized. However, it should be noted that parrots have actually been arrested and questioned by police in regards to possible pirate connections. That's pretty funny, actually. Alright. Such was the case of Percy. Rented for a British teleplay based on the tales of Long John Silver, Percy let out with a string of filth just before showtime, including telling the director to bloody well, quote, bugger off, end quote. Although the actors considered this a normal response to any director, this did not reflect the fine Amazonian background the pet store had pitched to rent the parrot through the production company. It indicated a far more lurid background that brought the parrot in for questioning. Pirates, who are rank throughout the triangle, would not likely leave a talking parrot behind to somehow divulge something later to the authorities that it might have picked up during the deadly encounter. Locations for derelicts nevertheless seem to follow the pattern of UFO reports. Anibal Rodriguez is another victim of mystery off Mayagüez, Puerto Rico, a location noted for decades for its high activity of UFO reports. His fishing vessel was found anchored only half a mile offshore, with nets still deployed. He had last been seen on Sunday, December 19th, 2004, and intended to return Monday early. If he had fallen off his boat, why did he not get back on? It was riding at anchor. I'm going to take a brief pause here. All right. Because it's just more and more accounts. Like, it just bleeds one right into the other. On June 19th, 2009, 3 more fishermen had vanished near San Juan, this time in a 21-foot Grady White. They had left Pinones on Friday. They went to cast line at a nearby reef and were never seen again. They were due back by 3 a.m. Saturday, giving rise to the possibility that they had rammed the reef in the darkness. Without having found a trace, the Coast Guard Sector Commander, Captain Eduardo Pino, nevertheless said, quote, "This case is a regrettable tragedy and another reminder of the dangers and respect that we must have for the sea." End quote. The disappearance of Don Chepo is another case in point in the Triangle's southern corner. She had left the U.S. Virgin Islands in St. John's, bound for Vieques Island on the eastern coast of Puerto Rico, and due to arrive there on May 15, 2008. It was not a long voyage for Phil Fredericks, and the 27-foot Don Chepo carried enough safety gear and was powered by 200 horsepower Evinrude outboards. Despite aggressively searching the area for 5 days, the Coast Guard located nothing. One motive UFO theorists do not raise, however, merits interjecting here: destruction and not abduction. There is only one truly confirmed type of UFO/USO, but it is too small to be involved in abduction. It is an ovoid disc 10 to 12 feet and only a few feet thick, yet its sightings and observed behavior usually fit the pattern required by the theory. Originally, it was seen far out in the Atlantic, but has in the decades since first seen come so close. Sorry, I'll reread that. Originally, it was seen far out in the Atlantic, but it has, in the decades since first seen, come so close into shore that it has been struck at by fishermen and even the Coast Guardsmen. The latter incident inspiring a sobering report, which was later released through a FOIA request initiated by CAUS, or the Citizens Against UFO Secrecy. This case is the Pascagoula USO incident, not to be confused with the supposed UFO abduction. On the night of November 6th, 1973, this ovoid disk crept silently into the shadows near Petit Bois Island. That's kind of weird. This is spelled Petit Bois Island, where four groups of fishermen, the Ryans and the Rices, were mullet fishing in skiffs. It had some form of light source on top from which it illuminated the water over it. After recovering from his surprise, Rami Ryan struck at it with his oar. The object was metallic. The group finally concentrated around it and struck at it more. Rami Ryan then struck at it with, quote, intent to kill, end quote. It finally dimmed its light and left. About 30 minutes later, he went to check on his fish buoy. The disc had actually been sitting beneath it waiting. It re-illuminated. That's scary, man. What intelligence is behind this? The group called the Coast Guard. Guardsmen Chuck Cruz and Larry Nations came in a 16-foot boat. They too soon found the USO and struck at it. Cruz was also sure it was metallic. The USO eventually moved onto the southwest before it finally disappeared. So it's like it didn't get the message the first time it got hit multiple times, and then went to go hide by the buoy that it was set out by the boat. And then once it noticed it was moving, it turned its lights back on. The heck is it doing stalking these people? And it only left after the second crew came through. This encounter was so startling that it was also reported in the local newspaper. Two officers, E.A. Wilbanks and Lieutenant Commander C.E. Dorman, were dispatched from the Naval Ship Research and Development Lab at Panama City, Florida, to investigate. After interviewing all witnesses, they report, and here I'm gonna read this out here. Light from object was directed toward surface. it appeared to come from a coherent source approximately 3 inches diameter, with a surface intersection circular or elliptical in shape, and approximately 10 feet by 12 feet in size. Color was generally described as yellowish/amber or with a light red tint. Intensity varied from, quote, almost too bright to look at, end quote, to 0, depending on amount of disturbance, brightness when first approached. When seen from the side, it was described as looking like a parachute underwater. Object felt metallic when struck, but could not be consistently struck. Portion of ore underwater was not visible from surface when in light beam from object. Object, quote, turned off, end quote, when struck with beam from flashlight. When light removed, object re-illuminated to previous intensity in about 1 minute. In its generalized southwest travel, object appeared to stop when it encountered an anchored boat. It would then remain in area until disturbed for 15 to 30 minutes. And that's the end of the report. The first time such an object was seen and described, it was in the air skimming about 70 feet over the Atlantic. The date was August 4th, 1950. The report came from the captain and two crew of a freighter off the Jersey coast heading toward the Gulf Stream. It is contained in CIA files released under FOIA request. It was silver metallic, an ovular, quote-unquote, or ellipsoidal disc, and the captain marveled that it was only about 10 feet in diameter and a few feet thick. One of the other crew described it as an egg cut in half lengthwise. Basically the Pascagoula USO, parachute shape on top, but with an essentially flat bottom. It sped off toward Nova Scotia, following a path out of the triangle. Acknowledging the existence of these disks does not mean endorsing the, quote, UFO theory, end quote, but one can well imagine that the unexpected appearance of such an object off the beam of a boat, especially for a lone sailor, could result in them panicking and falling overboard. There seems no question the Pascagoula USO showed no fear and repeatedly wanted to find a fisherman while he was alone. The thin bottom sands of the Great Bahama Bank have been host to a strange phenomenon. Lines are found etched on the bottom, appearing very much like a furrow made by dragging an anchor or from the wake of something very speedy. However, the problem is that these lines have been observed to cross over small islands, as though whatever caused them could simply fly out and over the sandbar or island and continue on. Groups of such underwater lights have been known to, quote, haunt, end quote, such places as Moselle Reef and Shoals near Bimini, and To be introduced later, larger versions up to 60 feet diameter have been seen below the waters of the triangle. Undersea unidentified objects have been reported in ship losses in the triangle. Reports of encounters with these objects tend to come from larger vessels since they more frequently survive the impact. While northeast of Bermuda in March 2000, the 770-foot Leader L was hit so hard by a, quote, metallic object, end quote, that it knocked a loose hull plate off, sinking the vessel in under a minute. Almost like that was strategically hit. It had 12 crewmen not been able to scramble off, the vessel would in effect have vanished. Off Tobago on April 11th, 2000, the 228-foot freighter Gran Rio R sent a weak message saying they had been holed. The captain requested a pump standing by at Crown Point, their destination. Though only 2 hours away, the vessel vanished. No GPS system triggered indicating the vessel had sunk, and the captain had not indicated there was an emergency. So a constant theme here is that like the SOS call and even the black boxes on these things are not going off. They're just straight up all electricity just being cut off. And this stuff's supposed to activate if there's a wreck or if there's an emergency. Why aren't they? Two years later, in September 2002, the Fiona R, also owned by the Rambaran shipping clan, and with one of the owners aboard as captain, vanished somewhere near St. Vincent, with nothing more hazardous than a cargo of sand. Its GPS also had not triggered. On October 7th, 2010, the SS Mystic from Miami to Haiti hit an underwater object over Quasar Bank, that's S-A-L, and sank into the shallows. The 10 crew were able to get off and be rescued. There is a particularly disturbing and lightning-like disappearance that remains a curious example of unexplained causes in the triangle. The Extra Labor, that's the name of the vessel, was en route to St. Petersburg, Florida from Texas on September 29, 2007. Michael Swindle, the new owner, was an inexperienced seaman, so he had hired veteran sailor Lindsay Ford, it's Ford with an E, to pilot the 45-foot luxury yacht. Somewhere off Bayport, Florida, north of the Anclote Key area, and that's spelled A-N-C-L-O-T-E, Swindle went below for some reason. When he came back up, Ford was no longer at the helm. He had disappeared. Swindle had heard no cry for help, nor could he see anybody in the water. The Coast Guard concluded with a certain ambiguity, quote, "We have suspended our active search pending further developments, meaning if new information comes to light, we would consider resuming our search. But at this time, we are confident that if Ford was in the area we searched, we would have found him, end quote. Coast Guard cutter Kodiak Island rushed to the scene of another incident on September 18, 2006. A passing boat 9 miles off Clearwater, Florida, south of Anclote Key, reported that an 18 pleasure craft, or an I-8 pleasure craft, was bound partially waterlogged. The fishing poles were still aboard, plus the food, cooler, and life jackets. The Coast Guard had not received any reports of overdue boaters that correlate with this case. On June 28, 2011, Randall Ward rented a 24-foot Hurricane Sun deck from Bahia Marina at Fort Lauderdale for a cruise offshore. He was expected back at 7 p.m. As the Coast Guard summarized, quote, "A Coast Guard station, Lake Worth Inlet, Florida. Boat crew was immediately launched and located Ward's rented boat floating adrift with no signs of Ward," end quote. Far from the pirate sea lanes, Andy Richmond entered the triangle by this same unlikely means on July 1st, 2010. He was traveling between home, which was Ocean Isle Beach, North Carolina, past South Carolina, when his 28-foot Heads or Tails was found beached on Myrtle Beach that night at 11:20 p.m., engine still running, and no sign of Richmond. Piracy played some kind of hand, it is assumed anyway, in the deserted offshore Pergola. It's another boat. A derelict and ransacked catamaran that eventually washed ashore in Guyana on April 17, 2015, but probably had been abandoned in the Windward Islands. Axel Vellor had set sail from the Cape Verdes across the Atlantic in mid-March, intending to set in along the tropical islands and then coast down to Trinidad. At some point, probably after he had mysteriously vanished from the boat, quote, salvagers, end quote, came along and ransacked it. Perhaps more should be made of the case of the offshore Pergola, considering its condition was similar to that of Hagen's Poker Face of the year before. Both were considered wrecked, but not by storm. Perhaps there is even more. Off these same Leeward Islands, retired U.S. Navy Captain Tom Olszewski was cruising in his 38-foot sailboat Tropic Bird. On June 8, 2000, something happened while he was riding the noon log below by his radar set. The interrupted entry in the log read, quote, 12:56 p.m., off Grenada, making good time, end quote, without a finished longitude and latitude notation. He came topside apparently to check out a radar return and vanished. On June 22nd, his sailboat was found beached hundreds of miles north on an Antiguan reef. Engine out of gas. Investigation of single-handed derelicts often does not take place due to the assumption the skipper merely had fallen over. Boat ownership or transference is processed at shore, or sometimes the boat is just sunk at sea. The case of the Bermuda II is typical. The sailboat was posted missing on January 5th, 2015, being then long overdue at Martinique. I don't know how to pronounce this. Martinique. Martinique. On January 21st, the International Boat Watch Net received the following information from the Elco D. Wall Senior Operator, JRCC, Curacao, Dutch Caribbean Coast Guard. And here's the excerpt. On January 18th, 2015, S/V Bermuda II found derelict within territorial waters of Honduras. Vessel had been towed towards port. Person on board still unaccounted for. Assumption is he fell overboard between 17th and 21st December 2014, north of ABC Islands. That's the end of the report. Abandoned boats are not the only mysteries in the Triangle in the last decade. Disappearances continue to occur, both of boats with individuals aboard and those with multiple passengers or crew. Although to the preferences of the present observer, the Yucatan Channel would seem too far from the strict triangle, it is actually much closer than those areas far up the Florida west coast, and certainly closer than the location of such famous mysteries often included in the Triangle's litany as the southern cities off Texas. So we have another drawing here of a boat, so let's get that up. A particularly sensational disappearance here is one of the most recent. This is off the southern cities off Texas. I'm sorry. Is that right? Southern Cities is a ship, I assume, off Texas. A particularly sensational disappearance here is one of the most recent. The 40-foot sports fisher Anastasia left Isla Mujeres on March 30th, 2016 to shark overnight off Punta Molas, Cozumel, with 5 seasoned captains and divers aboard. The distinctive blue vessel has completely vanished with no trace. There was no SOS. Long journeys make uncovering disappearances more tenuous. BOLOs, or be on the lookout for a vessel, are about as much information as there is. Such is the case with the yacht Lily Ooh La La, a 40-foot catch. Quote, all yachts in the Bahamas, T&C, Dominican Republic, virgins, end quote. Description. The Lily Ooh La La 40-foot gaff ketch, wooden spars, white hull with green stripe along the hull shear line, possibly New Jersey registration number, painted in white on the green stripe, could be under American or British flag. Crew/owner Kenny Jackson of Guernsey, Channel Islands. That place is spelled Guernsey, and with Black Cat answering to the name Buddy. Yacht is equipped with VHF. And that's the end of that description. Jackson had left Charleston, South Carolina, March 23rd, 2009, bound for Nassau, Bahamas, with Buddy. After he, quote, uncharacteristically, end quote, did not update family and friends, calls to the Bahamian authorities could not confirm he had even made a landfall. Third-hand rumor had said that two other yachts, Banderio and Windstar 4, had seen the vessel, but this too remained unconfirmed. Without finding anything more, friends finally posted queries. The same mystery rings true in the case of No Patience, and that's KNOW, and the disappearance aboard of Michael Britt. Aboard his 36-foot Bento, he was headed to Jacksonville, Florida, and last seen by members of the Coast Guard cutter Kingfisher on September 15th, 2011, only 1 mile off Port Canaveral, Florida. Since many boaters do not file boat plans, and day sailors don't intend to go far enough to do so, it is almost impossible to uncover just when a boat goes missing. Sometimes only flares are a clue to trouble, as in a case off New Smyrna Beach, Florida in January 2009. At 8 p.m., a vessel sighted, quote, multiple flares being fired off in the distance, end quote. The Coast Guard was quickly at the scene, but only encountered more red flares, 9 in all, which they could not trace. Other passing vessels also reported the flares. The Coast Guard covered a huge section of the ocean, but the result was not only negative, there was no one missing. No vessel had been reported overdue. So this actually brings up the time displacement portion of all of this. Could those flares that were seen when there were no reports of boats missing, could that have been from a different instance, just playing out to these other people on the sea, but it was actually from a different time? There's time jumps and time skips and all of this stuff. I'm actually, if we were to look deep enough into this, I'm sure we would find some like modern reports of very old sailing ships being seen. And maybe, just maybe, some of these USOs are future ships that we have no idea about. And it's not that they've time traveled on their own accord, but maybe the displacement of time that happens in the Bermuda Triangle causes this bleed over of timelines. let's get back to this same passage for no patience. Or actually, no. Let me clarify here. So, for this boat that was never reported missing, and they saw the flares, and then they called off the search, Captain Andrew Blom, spelled B-L-O-M-M-E, Sector Jacksonville, commented on the discontinuance of the search. Quote, "Every case is different, and we look at all the factors involved. We have saturated the area with air and surface assets, and we have had no reports of distress, and our search units haven't seen any sign of debris." End quote. Yet another tenuous disappearance is that of the Delilah. All that is known about the vessel is that its operators were using an essentially obsolete frequency that was soon to be officially discontinued, which is 121.5 megahertz. Hey John, good to see you here. We're just going through different lists of missing vessels here and the situations that they were involved in. If you're just tuning in now, it's all good. A mayday from the vessel had said they were about 140 miles off Savannah, Georgia, with 6 people aboard, and they were taking on water. The person sending the mayday even got so specific as to describe the vessel's hull scheme, which was blue in color. The Coast Guard responded en masse with several aircraft and 2 fast cutters, the Yellowfin and the Spence, but no trace was found. The call came out of nowhere on July 8th, 2008, and then receded away. It should be noted that similar calls have been received over the years by Florida base stations, to the effect that a boat, which can never be traced, is taking on water, and people are presently abandoning. In each case, the Coast Guard rushes to the scene, never to find a trace. It is as if the same event keeps replaying, at least over the radio waves. So this brings up the conversation of ley lines acting as a magnetic VHS tape. At least over land, ley lines can record high energy events that are replayed over and over again. One specific area in particular that I think that happens in is Gettysburg. We'll have to talk about like recordings of events onto ley lines further at another time. Either one accepts some distortion of time and space, or hoaxers are cruelly at work, not only endangering the Coast Guard by sending them on pointless missions, but wasting millions of dollars and funds that are better spent elsewhere in real rescue operations. The possibility of a hoax cannot be ruled out in this case, since the 121.5 frequency does not have that far of a range as the one that has now replaced it, the 406 megahertz. The most sudden cause of destruction at sea is a boat catching fire or even suddenly exploding. In the busy waters of the Triangle, however, it is hard for such a tragic event to go unnoticed. For instance, on August 6, 2013, 26 miles east of Bimini in the Bahamas, and a 35-foot fishing vessel suddenly exploded, sending not only a loud and disturbing boom over the tranquil waters, but also a tall plume of black smoke over the horizon. Other boats were soon at hand, but only found debris and no survivors. John says, 1.21 gigawatts. Yeah. Except in this case, it's 121.5. But yeah, the numbers still play out. In the case of the disappearance of Glenn Brandt, there was no search, only alerts. He had left Nassau on May 9th, 2010, in his large 46-foot charter yacht, Genesis. He had reported that he would refuel at Marathon Key, Florida on May 15th, but never arrived. Urgent marine information broadcasts went out, plus alerts for boaters to be on the lookout. Brandt is simply another example of a boater who silently vanishes. The disappearance of William Brown is hard to explain. It was October 5th, 2010. The weather was good. It was daytime. He left his houseboat to row ashore at Geiger Key Marina to pay a court fine. When he was reported missing, police boarded his boat. They found his dog Nadine and his cell phone. Brown was never seen again, nor was his dinghy. In these same waters on March 4th, 1996, 26-year-old Thomas Crocker was moving a 22-foot sailboat from Garrison Bight Marina on Key West to only a few miles away to Peninsula Marina on neighboring Stock Island. Yet he never arrived. The water began to blow a bit, but Crocker was an experienced sailor. The water is shallow. If the boat went down, where is it? The course says it must lie in these aquamarine shallow waters. In fact, it does not. For many boats, their disappearances are summarized only in alerts. Overdue notices were placed for the sailing vessel Sinbad, a 50-foot yacht bound from Bermuda to the Azores, June 8th, 2013. Kailua, spelled Kailua, a 40-foot sailing vessel, left Miami for Brazil and found its way on the same list. She had left in February 2013. Both vessels had 3 people aboard. The case of the 36-foot sailboat Blondie is a different matter. Bill Smith and his friend, Tom Brewer, had left Marathon in the Florida Keys on January 19th, 2013, in order to sail the Caribbean. Both had labored extensively to get Blondie ready for a 3 to 4 week cruise. There were rumors in the Boot Key Harbor Cruisers Net, a gossip pipeline for boaters, that a life ring had been found in the Gulf, though this was not confirmed and even more so soundly doubted because it was up current from the direction Blondie had taken. Quote, we have sort of come to terms with the fact that something terrible happened to the boat and he is not coming back, end quote, declared one friend. Boat watches were also placed in effect for the sailing yacht Lady Domina, or Domina, spelled Domina, or Lady Domina. On March 31st, 2013, the 75-foot motor sailor had left St. Martin bound for the Azores. Aside from her Norwegian captain, there were 4 others aboard. The Lady Domina had no real workable sails anymore except an old foresail. But the boat had a 220 horsepower diesel engine. She was capable of 5 to 6 knots. Working backwards in dates reveals alerts issued for the following. No definite word ever came back about the S/V 2 captains, overdue in September 2009, through an EPIRB, though an EPIRB was supposedly picked up briefly. Banana Split was posted overdue at the Bahamas in May 2007. Sailboat Johannes overdue with no word, April 2007. Chloe overdue from Havana to Isla Mujeres, February 2006. It just keeps going and going. Overdue from Trinidad to St. Martin was the sailboat Marsal, spelled Marsal, January 2005. At the end of the month, the boat washed up on the beach in Venezuela, completely deserted. Welsh Dragon left Florida for Holland and vanished November 2003. The Hudson disappeared for some time at sea until finally found 900 miles northeast of French Guiana, abandoned July 21st, 2003. On September 23rd, 2015, a quote, pan, end quote, was issued for the 52-foot ketch Maritango. She had left Norfolk, Virginia on July 13th for the Azores with 3 crew. In this case, modern technology helped pinpoint a location. A spot GPS stopped transmitting on July 26th at 39.5839 north, 61.33664 west, hundreds of miles north of Bermuda, with nothing heard from the vessel thereafter. Usually the location would be considered too far north of the triangle. However, because of GPS, this is a curious example of how a vessel simply vanishes. No SOS or EPIRB signal was heard. Presumably, everything went dead at the same time. Any number of events may have been responsible for the many missing vessels or the boats found abandoned in the Bermuda Triangle in the last decade, but the problem is the mystery, because each totally disappeared, or their crews. We are left with nothing but theory, most of which are nothing but ideas expressed during a gut reaction. Discussions over theories can become so heated that those arguing can lose sight of the fact no one theory can technically account for all of the losses. Even more insidious to serving the subject, isolating each case and simply reacting to it thwarts linking the similarities that exist in many of the cases. Opting to believe a favorite theory does not magically make it into a fact. Falling overboard is a favorite option to endorse in the case of derelicts, except that any serious theory must take into account the broader picture painted by the unsettling studies of the 19th century that show more deserted ships are found in the Bermuda Triangle than anywhere else in the North Atlantic, a phenomenon which continues to this day, only with the addition now that it is more prevalent closer to shore than in the past. Aircraft disappearances present different challenges, often more puzzling ones because of the limited factors that could contribute to their vanishing. Pirates cannot board them in midair. Pilots don't fall out or intentionally go over the side to repair anything while in flight. Flight plans are mandatory so that all aircraft can be tracked and identified. Travel between long spans is much shorter time-wise. Radar covers most of the airways. If a plane vanishes, it should be a dead weight that plummets to the ocean. And if ELTs don't transmit, as is usual, there is now the assistance of GPS. Though it was designed to keep pilots from getting lost, the sudden lack of its transmission signal has turned GPS into an opposite of ELT. Automatic silence rather than an automatic signal now telling the searchers where to rush. I missed one of your comments, John. John said, I have been deep diving on this subject. Great to see you, Stephen. It's great to see you too, John. Searches are immediate and yet find no trace. This makes aircraft disappearances more unsettling. Fewer in number have vanished in the last decade, but the locations remain the same as those in decades before. And then we're going to start reading about these aircraft here. We got like 6 to 7 pages left. Just giving you all a heads up. Alright. On November 13th, 2003, a Piper PA-32-300 N8224C went missing after leaving Staniel K. Exuma's only pilot on board. On June 20th, 2005, a Piper Apache N6886Y vanished between Treasure Cay, Bahamas, while en route to Fort Pierce, Florida, with 3 persons aboard. On April 10th, 2007, Piper PA-46-310P N444JH vanished near the Berry Islands in the Bahamas, only pilot aboard. After 9/11, several security measures went into effect that retroactively and incongruously applied more censorship to historic accidents. In doing so, often humorously living up to the metaphor, quote, locking the barn after the horse has gotten loose, end quote. Yeah. It's a good comparison. Despite U.S. Air Force accidents from World War II to the present being itemized online on various independent website databases, complete with locations where the accident or disappearance occurred, formal reports cleared through the appropriate agency now come remarkably redacted, even of the information already available online. For incidents after 2002, however, the censorship is excessive and affects all cases. As a result, it is almost impossible to discover the disappearance of Air Force aircraft since that time. Considerable mystery and controversy surrounds the disappearance on December 15th, 2008, near the Turks and Caicos Islands, of a 3-engine Britain-Norman Tri-Islander, Mark III N650LP, with pilot and 11 persons aboard. At 5:28 p.m., the pilot had sent a garbled or incoherent mayday to Providenciales Airport, Caicos Islands, and then vanished. However, Coast Guard Petty Officer Barry Benham, spelled B-E-N-A, stated that the plane had, quote, dropped off radar, end quote, shortly after departing the Dominican Republic, a disparity of hundreds of miles from the Caicos. An AP story confirmed that the, quote, plane took off from Santiago, Dominican Republic at approximately 3:30 p.m. Monday and fell off radar about 35 minutes later, shortly after controllers received an emergency signal, end quote. Yet another contradiction with the time of the mayday picked up by the Providenciales at 5:28 p.m. Because the investigation was in the hands of British air authorities, the National Transportation Safety Board had to blandly conclude, quote, the pilot and the reported 11 passengers have not been located. The airplane was not found and presumed to have ditched in the ocean about 12 nautical miles south of West Caicos, Turk and Caicos Islands, end quote. It is interesting to note that this is the general location where Dixon sent an SOS in 1960 and Carolyn Cascio in 1969, and in both instances, it was not entirely understood exactly what the problem was or where they were by those picking up the distress. Exactly as in the case of the Tri-Islander, which apparently did not exist on radar for an hour and a half before its mayday was heard. On December 15th, 2009, a Cirrus SR-22 N723LJ took off from St. Petersburg, Florida, and headed west into the Gulf of Mexico, with only its pilot aboard. The NTSB summarized, and here's the report here. After takeoff from the coastal airport, the airplane made a left turn to the west, and the pilot was approved for a frequency change by air traffic control. There were no further known communications with the pilot. A radar target consistent with the airplane's departure was observed flying westbound over Gulf waters. The target climbed to an altitude of 9,900 feet mean sea level, or MSL, where it remained until radar contact was lost. The last radar target was observed about 1 hour after takeoff, about 150 miles west-southwest of the departure airport, traveling at a ground speed of 167 knots. The pilot's spouse was not aware that he had been flying and reported the airplane missing 2 days later. Search and rescue personnel conducted 3 sorties, which covered 1,890 square miles, with negative results. At the time of this writing, the location of the airplane and the condition of the pilot are not known. The National Transportation Safety Board determines the probable causes of this accident to be undetermined. Airplane and pilot missing. And that's the end of that report. Several changes have occurred in the last decade altogether, making it more difficult to extract not only the details of missing aircraft, but their actual occurrence. Being listed as stolen is one such hindrance, as already noted. In this case, there is no NTSB investigation. There would be an insurance or police report, both quite brief. Coast Guard searches for missing boaters or pilots do not mean there will be a Coast Guard investigative report. Often the crew or passengers are listed as missing people, and this places the case in the hands of local law enforcement. Often, no report is generated outside of a typical officer-generated log. Sometimes the only clue to a disappearance at sea is that one of the passengers aboard appears on the DOE network as a, quote, missing person, end quote, and the summary explains the circumstances of their disappearance. It is in this area where changes have come about as to be advantageous for the investigator. The DOE network database is searchable. However, the large number of missing person reports still makes it difficult. Each circumstance for a missing person listed therein is subject to much interpretation. In the long run, all that can be definitely ascertained is that the people who are missing at sea have indeed vanished. Whether a crime was involved, an intentional disappearance, or whether the cause was some phenomenon we attribute to the Bermuda Triangle, can only be implied by analysis of those facts listed there. And these facts are admittedly few and far between. Examples of disappearances contained within the network include the discovery of Gregory Wallen's 19-foot pleasure craft found abandoned at sea 53 miles southwest of Sanibel Island, Florida, the same location where the 21st century Gulf mysteries would occur. He was last seen in Fort Myers on December 31st, 1998, and possibly had a woman on board with him. Yet another derelict uncovered via this way is the 30-foot fishing boat of David Field. He was last seen at the Summit's Landing Marina in Mico, near Melbourne, Florida, on March 27, 1993, and then later called one of his employees at his car dealership to tell him he was fishing 30 miles offshore. When found, his lifeless boat was then towed to shore. There had been no sign of a struggle. Charles Dillon and Arthur Sasson, that's spelled Sassone, vanished, whereas the bodies of the other two aboard Dillon's Double O were found, along with an ice chest and some life jackets, on January 16, 1994. The 26-foot boat presumably sank somewhere in the Gulf, about 25 miles west of where many others would be found derelict, and Clote Key. Records extend back decades. For one disappearance, much must be deduced. There is only the following summary. Jesse Markham, a West Palm Beach resident, ex-Navy pilot, daredevil flyer who worked missions for the U.S. government, flew out of Palm Beach International Airport July 21st, 1982. He hasn't been seen since. A phone call and so that's the end of that. A phone call is all that alerted the Coast Guard and law enforcement. There had been another disappearance. On April 27, 1987, James O'Connor called a friend and told him he was in Cozumel. That's spelled Cozumel. He asked him to pick him up at Boca Raton Airport at 12:30 p.m. Accompanying him was Dennis Behr, that's B-E-H-R, of Dania Beach. They never arrived. There was no record they had ever left the United States for Cozumel, and no evidence they left Cozumel except for the fact their aircraft, a Cessna 337 N25195 with blue and white livery, was never found. Departing from Dinner Key Marina on December 6, 1983, Art Carver and Kevin Wadsworth headed to Bimini in a 21-foot Enterprise. They were never seen again. Again, this incident and several others just mentioned call our attention to the, quote, Christmas time hex, end quote. A surprising coincidence if these disappearances are just a result of statistically acceptable accidents of unknown origin. Details must be provocative in the case of the 46-foot Richardson yacht Sea Fever, with 4 persons aboard, 2 men and 2 women, including Angela Westbury, to warrant the final conclusion, quote, foul play is suspected, end quote. The vessel left Jacksonville, Florida on December 1st, 1984, so the 4 could vacation on the boat in a cruise of the Bahamas. However, the yacht was recorded by U.S. Customs at Grand Cayman Island, west of Jamaica, on December 14th, 1984. Quote, it is not known if Westbury was still on board at that time. Neither Sea Fever nor Westbury have been seen since. Her sister reported her as a missing person to authorities, end quote. For the vessel to appear in Grand Cayman when the cruise was set to the Bahamas may have been enough to make the Coast Guard suspicious. The island appears to be a link in a drug smuggling or white slavery chain from Florida to the Bahamas and into Central and South America. Weeks after the 185-foot freighter Freedom disappeared in January 1989, a diver claimed to have seen a coastal freighter at Grand Cayman. When the ship had left Florida, it was supposed to be going to Haiti. Definitely in another direction from Grand Cayman. To compound official suspicions, the vessel carried a ne'er-do-well German named Florian Borsch, who had, for whatever reason, invited 23-year-old journalist student Linda Bishop to accompany him so she could see the conditions in Haiti. They were never seen again. Doe network records are, of course, dependent on whether the missing person was ever reported therein. But though they are spotty at the best of times, they go back many decades and include hard-to-explain cases like the simultaneous disappearance on April 16, 1973, of William Forshee, spelled Forshee, his son William Jr., and their two friends aboard Forshee's boat near Marco Island, Florida. Sheriffs found Forshee's truck and then the boat, but the four men were never found. I want to say something is kidnapping these people. Stanley Borofsky was last seen in Fort Lauderdale. He called home a couple of days before Thanksgiving, November 24th, 1977, telling his family he would be there the following day. He then vanished. He owned 3 aircraft. Family was able to trace 2 of them, but the third could not be found. No flight plan had been filed in his name. Just what happened to Borofsky and where? We got about 2 pages left here. And I just noticed we just went over 2 hours. It's all good. We're staying within 3 hours, so it's all right. On January 13th, 1998, John Perez and Raul Diaz left Miami in their boat. Their summary only reads that they, quote, left to go fishing to the Bahamas and never returned, end quote. The cases above, spanning only a few decades, constitute the mere tip of the iceberg for so many others that once resided in police files or in Coast Guard SAR reports, but which have long been destroyed because of file-keeping rules and regulations. Those cases that did get cross-filed into the Doe network barely give us a clue to the extent of missing persons at sea. Many of the disappearances are outside of U.S. jurisdiction. Only investigations of air accidents undertaken by Bahamas Air Authority merit listing in their databank, whereas the other incidents in their territory and disappearing constitutes being an incident are only given a docket number without elaborating details. Almost all investigations undertaken by them in the 21st century have been of aircraft accidents near an airport. Of those that were either arriving or after having just recently taken off. Disappearances in mid-flight between far-flung destinations which with few exceptions constitutes most cases in the Bermuda Triangle, are not something for which one will readily find an entry in their databank. The Bahamas are a national Venice in their way. Rather than a city with streets of water, the Bahamas is a nation where cities and islands are connected by a highway of water and air, neither of which make it easy for investigators to venture far from the island airports. And if there is nothing tangible to investigate, such as is obviously the case in a disappearance, there is simply no investigation. On the other hand, NTSB will at least investigate the circumstances of a disappearance, including weather data, family information, medical certificates, any clue that might shed light on suicide, pilot experience, or structural defects. Information in the Bahamas must be gleaned from other sources if one wishes to establish some details about disappearances. These sources would be police reports of missing people, which will then give some circumstances about being in transit, either via boat or aircraft when they vanished. Some facts from accident reports prove interesting reading, especially as some seem to support very unofficial theories that there must be some as yet unknown force at work in the disappearances in the Bermuda Triangle. For instance, on May 16, 2005, the pilot of a Flamingo Air Charter Britain Normal Islander noticed his airspeed drastically slow over the tongue of the ocean while en route to Great Exuma. As a result, he was barely able to make land and had to crash in the wooded area 3 miles short of the runway at Mosstown. On December 17, 2009, a Falcon jet slowed suddenly as if encountering some unknown restricting veil, and without any word from both pilot or co-pilot, plunged from its cruising altitude of 28,000 feet and impacted on Great Inagua, its explosion rattling house windows and doors at Matthewtown miles away, and its dark plume of smoke attracting a Coast Guard chopper on routine maneuvers. It is interesting to note that this is the same area where others have gotten lost, but could not otherwise explain how to the local radio control towers. Multifactorial causes for the disappearances in the Bermuda Triangle seem evident from the circumstances that have been compiled over the decades, but the most disturbing coming from those cases which suggest, quote, electronic fog, end quote. A sudden, quote, winking out, end quote, from radar. Sudden disappearance even while near shore. Unexplained loss of navigation and electronic equipment, and from the reports of UFOs. Instead of approaching a solution along the lines of a single factor, theorists propose a variety of causes to explain the many missing planes and ships in the triangle, while the most pertinacious have gone beyond this to link the most inexplicable phenomena as having one very disquieting source. These traditional categories of theories are generally well known in the topic's narrative, but in the last decade, more data has come forth to help winnow down just what theories should really be entertained seriously. Some previously sketchy theories are strengthened by the data. Others do not need to be seriously considered anymore. First and foremost of all the theories for today is that of electronic fog. And that's going to be the chapter for next week. Chapter 6, Electronic Fog, the answer or a symptom? Those pillar clouds, I think, have something to do with this also. And then those USOs just hanging out near the boat after it got whacked. Like it didn't get the message to leave. Not sure what to think about all that. What do you guys all think? Let me know in the comments here, especially if you're watching after the fact. Share your thoughts. Let's get a conversation going. Right now, I'm thinking a lot of this is time displacement, space displacement, some intelligent forces behind this, or multiple intelligent sources. There's also the Earth, the Gaia, where this is apparently... I had mentioned this actually in Coral Castle, in the deep dive over there. This is really something with, like, the soul of the Earth. And that in the Bermuda Triangle is where all this is. Like, it's in that location. Now, the only thing that, like, ventures off from that is that these occurrences are happening closer to shore, like he says. Like, in modern times, it's happening closer and closer to shore. Is it because these entities that are causing the disappearances are having to seek further, like outside of the boundary of the triangle? It could be. Could it also be that the phenomenon of the triangle and all the mysterious elements involved is that area moving, kind of like it's just something that's happening on the Earth, and here it's moving kind of like with the poles, like a magnetic force? Again, a viable answer, but not really clear as of yet. And we've been doing this close to a year now, and all we've gotten really is the time and space displacement, the pillar clouds, the electronic fog, people missing, but the boats and planes derelict, so nobody on them, with the keys in the ignition still, with the pets still on board, except for the talking parrots, for some of them that had parrots on them. So what is it? The fact that the USO was just like floating around the boat, and they hit it with the oar to like see what it was, and then hit it several more times to see if it would move and go away. Like, it didn't leave. It went over by where it was anchored in by the buoy, and then it turned its light back on when they were pulling the buoy in. Oh. We'll get to the bottom of this. It's going to take a little bit longer, though. So we'll be reading, since I took several weeks off from doing this show over the past year, because I every week was just not manageable for me. But we're here now at 33 parts into this deep dive series. We are on the third book, and we should be finishing that up at the end of next month. I haven't decided which book we will look into after this one, but this one's delivering a lot of valuable and well-researched information. And again, the author, he has many books out about similar things. He has an Amelia Earhart book, which I picked up. Also, the Flight 19, the Avengers disappearance. 5 airplanes just go missing. I have that, and then I also have the USS Cyclops, all by the same author. So he's gone into detail on some of these specific incidents. An entire book about one incident, an entire book about the other. And then an overall coverage of Amelia Earhart. So there's more. We're going to be looking into this. I think some answers to our questions here can be found on my Coral Castle series, because we're talking about the world grid and Homestead, Florida, which is south of Miami, and it's near all of these ley lines of the Bermuda Triangle. So we're looking at something here where known physics can be altered. And as of right now, as of present day, it's unexplainable. It's just the way it is. But here we're looking for answers. We're going to find some. We're going to find some good nuggets of information in here. But I don't think we're going to get concrete answers. But that doesn't discourage me. I think what we have to focus on here is the broader picture and how we can insert the information that we're getting out of these books into what we've already researched, and again, come to our own conclusions on this. So I encourage all of you out there to research this on your own, to try to find more information. We glossed over so many different disappearances today, and especially last week. Had over 250 cases. I mean, we're talking just page after page. Like, these are all missing ships and planes. That's a lot of cargo. That's a lot of people. We're talking about like in the high hundreds to, I mean, possibly over 1,000 people missing from just what we've gone over so far. And this book was published in 2017, so there's already another 10 years that's passed since this book's been published, on top of the military reports being suppressed from 2002 onward because of 9/11. There's a lot of different things. So we're very fortunate for this author to have looked through 2002 to 2017. He had to do the FOIA requests. That's a lot of work. You have to wait quite a long time for some FOIA requests. Like they have an obligation to get back to you, but they don't have an obligation to give you everything you're requesting. They could just write it off and say it's too much. It's happened to me before with local government. You have to like narrow down specific. I'm sure this author had to do something where he sent out FOIA requests for specific incidents and events and tried to get back as much as he could. And as he explained in this chapter, some of it was very sparse. There's not enough added to it, and a lot of these cases were categorized as missing people without further elaboration. So we're dealing with a lot of different elements here. Government cover-up, possible abduction from unknown entities. We don't know what. We're also hearing that these people may not be dead, that they're in a different realm, that they're not dead. They could be displaced in time. They could be showing up in the future or the past, for all we know, from what we perceive. All of time is happening at once, so there's that too. And I mean, the comparisons of time being like a piece of fabric and we're just like stuck to parts of them. This Bermuda Triangle is like lifting us off of that fabric. Whoever's in the triangle and goes missing. You have like radio signals that should be being picked up by Fort Lauderdale. They're being picked up in New York. There's logistically, from just a technical radio perspective, that's impossible to happen. Just with the range alone. Radio waves are rolling. They travel a certain frequency. Just like a ball rolling downhill, once it hits a level area, it loses the momentum. That's why when you're driving cross country, you're listening to a radio station and all of a sudden it starts switching over. That's why. It's just the field that signal is covering, and it starts overlapping into a shared signal in the next region. So that's about it for today. I really don't have much more to add from what we just discussed here and now. I'll show some of the photos again from this chapter, and I'm going to try to do this going forward for all the future installments. Let's zoom in on this thing. Let me see if I can pull this off here. All right. I'm going to move this around a little bit. There's going to be fade transitions here. So the numbers that are on this map here are different disappearances. And this is just giving us a general idea of where all these took place. It actually looks like a small area, but it's not. I want to make this a little smaller here. So that's that. And then you can see on the left side of this image, I believe that's where the Gulf just drops, and there's a much further depth in the Gulf there. Then after that, we have the second photo, which was what a lot of these boaters were keeping an eye out for. We still don't know why they didn't make it. And this is called Memory Rock. And then finally, we had a drawing of the Anastasia. Or Anastasia. See, we're dealing with all these different nationalities and regions, like the French, Norwegian, all of South America. We had Venezuela come up as one of the places where some of the derelict boats showed up. But yeah, that's going to do it for today, guys. Again, if you haven't liked the video, please do so now. And we'll be back for sure on Tuesday for Coral Castle. And again next Thursday, 6 p.m. Central, for Bermuda Triangle. We're going to cover that chapter on electronic fog. I think it's going to be a good one. And I'm still undecided about a Sunday show, but it is up for debate. I might do it, might not. So just keep an eye out for that. And if you are subscribed, check the bell notification icon. Make sure when you click on that it says all. Otherwise, it's not going to show you the lives. I had that happen with Zen Ray here, where he mentioned that nobody, like, he didn't see it anywhere in his notifications. He had no clue that I was live. Like, YouTube didn't tell him. So I'm sure that's happening with the rest of my channel, and I don't know why. But that's just what's happening. But y'all take care of yourselves. And until the next one, class dismissed.